Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to all the viewers of the session that are joining us today. And welcome to everybody that is making this be possible and happen here today. It is a pleasure to be with you. My name is Gabi Baessi, or Gabis. My pronouns are they, them. And before I start, I'll present a little bit about myself. I'm a transgender, non-binary person. I'm joining you here today from the unceded territory of the Potiguara people, also known as Natal, in the corner of Brazil, in the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. I'm the regional director for Latin America and the Caribbean at Youth for Nature. And I'm also an intersectional researcher with a multidisciplinary approach. I've been working with climate change, biodiversity, education, urban rights, urban mobility, feminist, queer theory, transgender, and queer ecology, a lot of other subjects that I love to be participating and thinking in the connections of them. I'm also an eco-queer activist fighting against the system with CIS, because the system is also cisgender. And again, it is my great pleasure to be the host of this conversation today. I'm very excited. This conversation is hosted by the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, the Office of the Independent Expert of Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, ILGA, World, and the Global Queer Youth Network. And now for the next 1 hour and a half, we will be inviting various speakers to discuss the need for decolonization of the gender binary and the different viewpoints held by the current generation of young people regarding the importance of gender roles. And I think this will be a very interesting. So I'm glad that you are here today. And before we get started, let's go with the housekeeping. So we have right now simultaneous translation to French and Spanish. So you can choose your preferred language by following the instructions that are sent in the chat. So be aware of the instructions to choose between English, French, and Spanish in this call. If you face any technical issues during the event, please use the Q&A, the questions and answer option. This option is open at Zoom, and we should be able to help you from there. And additionally, for safeguarding reasons, all participants, except for the speakers, will have their camera and audio options off. Thank you very much for that. And now let's get started. So we'd like to begin our dialogue by entering our first segment of this conversation that is named Decolonizing the Gender Binary. So let's start it. And to start this conversation, I will not be alone. As I said, I'll be joined by other speakers that will be talking about their experiences challenging the gender binary with a decolonial lens. And we'll have now 3 amazing speakers. And first of all, I will ask them to please introduce themselves so we can start to get to know each other and before we move to the conversation. So I would like first to introduce Flor Gonzalez, so you can introduce a little bit about yourself, Flor.
Thank you. Hey, my name is Flor Gonzalez. I am Guatemalan and I'm 33 years old, and I am the facilitator for a community of action in a program named We Lead. That is one of the programs that Restless Development has working on, and we are working in 9 countries on sexual and reproductive health and rights for young women. So it's a pleasure for me being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Flor. It's a pleasure to have you here as well. And to follow our conversation, can Kelvin Wangari introduce themselves, please? I think that maybe Kelvin is facing some technical issues, but don't worry, we will address this so we can keep moving. I will ask now Umaira to present a little bit about you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Umaira Ahmad, and I'm the Advancing Universal Rights and Justice Coordinator at AWID. AWID stands for Association for Women's Rights and Development, where we work with, we're a membership-based organization working to support feminist movements around the world. I go by the she, her pronouns, and I'm based in Malaysia, where I also support migrant and queer movements and organizing. Thanks so much for having me here.
Thank you, Umaira. And now we are joined by Kelvin as well. So Kelvin, can you present a little bit about yourself?
Mutugi. I go by the pronouns they, them. I'm based in Mombasa, Kenya. That is in Africa. LGBTIQ persons, where we currently are dealing with advocacy and liberation of the gender non-binaries in terms of organization and both economically and socially. And we are good to have you all, and I hope we'll have a constructive engagement. Back to you, Gabby.
Thank you so much, Kelvin. And thank you, all of you, for those introductions. It is a pleasure to have such a fascinating group of people in our conversation today. And so let's start our conversation. And to start our first question, I'll give a little bit of an introduction. I already said that we are going in this first segment to be discussing the decolonizing of gender binary. And the binary thought is something very recent in the history and was brought with the colonization, and with this colonization separated our diverse world in two. It was this binary view of nature versus people, nature versus cities, good versus bad, and of course the gender binary, women versus men. So everything started to get separated as binaries, as two places. And the separation was and still is a form of oppression that stripped indigenous communities of their unique gender identities, stripped a lot of gender identities that existed, and until today, it is a way of oppressing and marginalized diversity. With that said, in practice, the question is, in practice, what entails the fight for decolonization of the gender binary? How does that apply to your advocacy strategies and practice? So to start this, I will give Flor the floor to answer, please.
Thank you so much. I was also going to start by saying that we understand the role of decolonization on people's sexuality as a central point for the exercise of power and oppression. And this has been possible through moral impositions and conservative ideas that have been installed and imposed through daily practices like gender binaries. Thus, this colonial patriarchal system establishes that bodies and people must become objects of dispossession, where sexuality can be something that can be taken off from people, exercising violence and control over their bodies and lives, expressions and practices. Therefore, we consider that it is very important to develop advocacy strategies where governments and societies can recognize freedom as a human right, and freedom to create new realities with dignities from our bodies, from our minds and hearts, not only for people, but also for our communities. Because this is how we can contribute to break down the patriarchy. In the We Lead program, that is the one that I am working on, we have this vision of placing the well-being of people at the center. So we believe that with a greater visibility and information, we can increase like more and more public support so that it is possible to manage changes in these legal frameworks and public policies in our countries, so that somehow and someday, because we are contributing, we can all recognize all rights for all people. And we also believe that this is always important, like to help society, especially younger people, to have educational tools through comprehensive sexuality education, so that they can know, so that we can build societies where we can break down the colonial, class, and patriarchal rules and expectations, and make these fundamental rights for all people promoted and respected equally for all of us.
Thank you so much for your answer. And now following with the same question, Kelvin, please.
I would say that it starts with us in our different organizations to first talk to our members. You start in-house, then you go outside. So you first
Hello, Kevin. Are you still there? We're having some connection problems. We're not hearing you right now. Okay. While Kelvin's facing some technical problems, we will just move to Umaira while they can reconnect to us. So Umaira, can you please now get the floor and answer the question, please?
Thank you so much. So just at the outset, I'll explain a bit more of the context of our work. So AWID also coordinates the Observatory on the Universality of Rights. It's a group of 15 organizations from all over the globe that works to challenge anti-rights actors. And by anti-rights actors, we mean actors that are far-right, religious fundamentalists, and also nationalists that want to undermine human rights, whether at the national, international, or regional level. And so one thing that we try to challenge is the argument and the cooptation of our own struggle against, our own collective struggle against colonization. So what we see coming up from here, especially because we work in the international human rights sphere while our partners and network works at the national level, so we see this global trend, is that the protection of rights, especially as it relates to gender sexuality, are being argued by these anti-rights actors that they're being imposed on certain countries, especially by those that were previously colonized. So I'm sure we've heard of all of these arguments before, and especially where I come from in Malaysia, we, even in terms of advocating for the rights of LGBTIQ people, these ideas are considered or argued to be Western or secular or foreign values. And later, as we'll discuss a bit more, these anti-rights group, they claim all of these arguments are, all of these things that we are fighting for is a part of the colonial agenda. And so what they do is that they represent themselves as defending non-Western countries from ideological colonization. But one thing to note as well is that these narratives are getting even more sophisticated, because instead of coming outright to deny the rights of queer people and also marginalized communities, they know how to misuse and misinterpret rights like freedom of religion and belief and freedom of speech to justify discrimination. So the Observatory of the Universality of Rights that I work with, we recognize that these actors are really mobilizing in a very big sense across issues, across sectors, across borders, and they're actually getting into human rights policies, spaces, and they're actually working with states to normalize discrimination. And so before I close, I just wanted to say that these tactics are very clear to us feminist and LGBT organizations, and we've done so much to take up space, to debunk these arguments, and take back the narrative from a reaffirming perspective, whether it's through campaigns, strategic communication, sensitizations. We've very clearly said, look, diverse gender identities, relations, and sexual orientations have existed everywhere throughout history, and we still do today. And culture is not one-dimensional at all. So for us at the Observatory, we recognize all this work being done by feminist and queer movements, but realize also to defeat these anti-rights actors, we really need to understand who they are, how they work, and where their money comes from, and to create tools to talk back together. And so this is where the Rights at Risk report came out, and I can share a link in the chat later, but the idea is to map out the different anti-rights tactics and arguments, and also to follow the money flow from a global perspective. So what we are really hoping is that this report can help activists with their strategies to help them expose the false narratives, the actors, and the connections for what they really are. There's also a Rights at Risk resource page that offers a methodology that can help groups to map out these anti-rights actors in developing their own strategies. And I can share that in the links.
Thank you so much. Yes, please share the links later. I think it will be very interesting for everybody here. And I'm so happy that Kelvin was able to join us again. So Kelvin, if you want to, we just got the start of your answer, so you can start again, please.
Hello. I hope now sorry for the technical error. I hope I'm good now, Gabby.
Yes, you are.
I am, thank you. So as I was saying, particularly in the Kenyan concept, we start with first, we liberate our minds first from the aspect that being queer, being LGBTQ is a Western idea. You know, once we liberate ourselves and we liberate everybody's mindset from that concept, I think that is when we become aware of our various, we can identify as we want to. You know, currently we have quite a few feminist organizations that are doing that, educating the various civil sectors, educating the normal, the on the ground persons on the various aspects of being a non-binary, not necessarily either being male or female, in the idea that there are more than two genders. I think that is what I would say for now.
Thank you so much.
Back to you, Gabby.
Yeah, thank you, Kelvin. And thank you everyone for your great answers. And I think it's already very interesting what you're bringing to think about this freedom for all in that Flor was talking about, including nature. I have been thinking a lot about this idea how both nature and these groups that are historically marginalized have been exploited with the colonization. And now moving for our next questions. Before we start this next question, I want to ask Vash to join us here today. They had a little bit of delay coming here, but I'm so glad that you are already here. So Vash, can you present you a little bit about yourself, please?
Hi everyone. So good evening from my side of the world. I apologize for the time issues. I think it's a time zone confusion. So yeah, I'm Vashti. I'm based from the Philippines. Currently, I'm in Malaysia now. So
Oh
I'm a
no,
trans
Vashti.
feminist.
Oh.
I am a member of the youth coalition. Can you hear me? Hello? No,
Yes, we
yeah,
can hear.
I'm
There
back.
was a
So
problem, but you're back.
yeah, so I am a member of the Youth Coalition for SRHR. And one of the things that we did, for example, last year is we drafted this My Body, My Voice report, where we had focus group discussions on different sectors of young people, including two-spirited LGBTQIA folks, young people. And we had so much sharings there. And also, aside from that, I was working in the university. I was teaching gender and sexuality, and we were also very um, excited in exploring gender diversity and criticizing neo-colonial, the neo-colonial gender binary and how it's very exploitative to uh, to us in the Philippines, or at least in Asia Pacific. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vashti. And now continue with our conversation. I will go to the next question that is, what can this growing diversity of gender, sexual orientation, gender expression mean to the future of conferences such as CSW, and how can we have a more broad focus thinking about this gender diversity, talking about also like women's issue, for example, as like CSW, who's very focused right now at those issues. To start this conversation, I will call you Myra.
Thank you so much. So just a bit of a background, the CSW is a Commission for Status of Women in New York that actually brings together states to come up with an agreed conclusion which outlines their commitment on gender equality. And so a lot of feminist organizations have invested time and also energy into this space because it was a product of the Beijing platform for action. And so we continue seeing a lot of kind of engagement from feminist movements in this space, but also increasingly queer and LGBTIQ organizations. So one thing that I think, based on your question, to kind of say what the opportunities are in terms of bringing more diversity on gender and sexual orientation, is that it gives us an opportunity to connect issues more strongly. Because as we know, you cannot divorce the rights of one community from others. And so what's really important is that it gives an opportunity to be intentional and holistic and intersectional in bringing the different movements together, but also the framework that we understand about our rights and to strengthen that. This means that it presents an opportunity to break down silos, not just in terms of issues, but also in terms of our rights. And there's such a big value in big picture analysis and cross-movement mobilization. And I think with this analysis, it gives us more opportunities to withstand co-optation by anti-rights actors, and it also withstands the marginalization of groups of people that usually can't even access this space. That's one part of it. And not to take up too much space, sorry, I'm talking a lot as well. But I think what's really important as well is that within the feminist movement, there's also a big reflection inwards. Like Kelvin said earlier, it starts from the inside, because I think with COVID, we really see enhance struggles for queer people in the global south to even engage with this space. So the world is opening up again, but what does that really mean for global south activists with severe inequality on the access to vaccines because of rich countries and the global north that don't want to support the TRIPS waiver? And these global south activists, even prior to COVID, already faced visa issues and expensive travel costs. So the question is like, how can we make sure, people of diverse gender and gender identity to sexual orientation can access these spaces? So the fight against the colonial understanding of gender also means understanding these aspects of inequality and the consequences that flow from it in our everyday advocacy. And this means that movements, especially big INGOs, have to be self-reflective and fight colonial practices within our own movements and structures. The intersectional approach has to go beyond analysis, and it has to be actually accompanied by praxis. Like I think Vashti mentioned earlier, how can we relate to each other in non-extractive ways, recognizing that yes, we're all working towards the same thing and the same goal, but we aren't all in the same boat. And what does it mean for larger organizations and NGOs to, with more access to spaces like CSW, to share power? And how can we really show up in true solidarity and not repeat the same structures that we want to dismantle?
Thank you so much. And to move on, I'll call now Vashti, please.
Yeah, so I echo what Umaira has mentioned and has shared, and I feel strongly about it also. And I think maybe to add on to that is because of the seemingly introduction of new ways of looking at our issues, like, putting on intersectionality lens, decolonial lens, so on and so forth, we also challenge these gender binaries that has been so normalized in CSW, for example. But because now we have the intersectionality framing, we look at it as, in the lens of ability and disability also, and climate and location, so on and so forth. And I think that's important because we see, we understand, we imagine how the diversity and complexity of our lives are, right? And how when we push for it, we can, and how we build cross-movement solidarities and movements and mobilizing. And of course, in the goal of, the feminist values that we adhere to. But also, just to be very honest and to be very frank, that it's a very difficult space to be in, right? Like to be in a space where there is a distinction of the gender binary, because yeah, of course, it has been institutionalized for so long, and therefore it's sometimes difficult to even mention, say, for example, in a space where birthing persons, right? So one good example was when we were in the Generation Equality Forum, and when we were writing the document, and we were suggesting we wanted to push, or we wanted to include terms like, trans and non-binary people into the document, because girls, non-binary folks are not girls, right? So and other birthing persons that are not covered by girls in all their diversity. So I think and it was like a big thing, especially for young people, to be in that space and to be pushing on that space where everything has been so like everything all was being moved and scheduled. Like you need to do it by this and this and this. But for young people organizing, queer people organizing, we need more time, and especially for us in the global south. So these even institutions, structures that are present are not friendly. And not just because it is, subscribing to gender binary, but because it's subscribing to, more adult-led, more global north, more resource-filled institutions. And therefore, sharing power and engaging and even accessing to this has been detrimental to a lot of us, especially from us, for example, in Asia Pacific, in our engagement in the Generation Equality Forum. So that's one of my thoughts. So I think when we talk about dismantling gender binary, it is not just dismantling the binary itself, but also how this cross cuts with other issues that we all inherently experience, but of course, differently, very, very differently.
Thank you so much. And I will give now the floor to Flor.
Thank you. I agree with what my colleagues have been saying. I also believe that this means that we have like a clear need to broaden the LGBTIQ plus perspectives in different areas. As my colleagues were saying, that it would go like from the local organizations to the largest and most complex institutions like the UN with these kind of conferences. I also think that it's part of finding like new ways and new languages where we can stop oppressing people for many reasons, including like through binary gender roles. I also think that it is important thinking of growing this diversity of gender, sexual orientation, and gender expression. Thinking that these kind of conferences take place like with our governments, and that makes me think like in that kind of spaces my government has like some kind of presence, and it makes me think of what happened on the 8th of March in Guatemala, where our government approved a law where violence and hate crimes against LGBTIQ plus people would have become legal instead of us, that we were going to be legal within our own country for having a sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression different from the norm. However, I think that these conferences on women's rights should continue to be like as part of the recognition of the systematic and historical violence that we have been part of and that continues to discriminate us. But also, I do believe that it is very important that in these kind of spaces, we always have a broad views where we are able to include all different expressions of women, so that we can make ourselves visible from the diversity, being able to be different in that kind of spaces, being able just to be the way we are and name ourselves the way we want to be named, and be safe to do so.
Thank you so much. You share very important remarks. I think also it is important that you're bringing about like the South and also like the diversity that we have among like queer people, LGBTQ people, youth. It's not a homogeneous group, it's a diverse group, and diverse people, like diverse different people from those groups should be participating, should be not only, as you were saying greatly, not occupying spaces, but being part of the decision making, being part of the organizations, of the of governments, of different aspects of the daily life. And to continue our conversation, we'll go to a question connected with that. Since we're already talking about the importance of having queer LGBTQ people in different spaces and places and all this intersection of it, this practical intersection, what you here think that can be done by key stakeholders to encourage a decolonial approach to gender equality. And key stakeholders, just to give explain what it is. These key stakeholders are these like member states of the United Nations by itself, youth activists, governments, what these different key people that are in the decision-making spaces, what can they do to encourage a decolonial approach to gender equality? And to start answering this, I will call Vashti, please.
Okay. Okay. I think for me, my recommendation really is when decision makers and leaders understood why it's really our issue, to dismantle gender binary because it's a colonial and neo-colonial concept, right? I think it's easier for them to implement it. Because I think it's so difficult to, suggest the ways, but they themselves don't understand how it works. Case in point, in the Philippines, I worked in HIV programming for transgender women. And there's a lot of cases where a lot of Filipinos cannot identify as women so that they can be tagged as trans women in data. But they don't also identify as men. But of course, they would be categorized as men in data. So we see that there's a rising number of HIV cases in the Philippines, and that and this affects mostly the MSM population, or the gay, bisexual MSM population in the Philippines. And then in the past 2 years, we're pushing for the inclusion of a more gender, like responsive mechanism to include tagging those who cannot identify with their gender. And we see from 2 reports that actually around 26%, there was a 26% reactivity rate of the transgender population. These are people, again, who didn't identify either male or female. So we've been very invisibilized in HIV programming, for example, or in certain SRHR issues. And even though the community has been raising these issues before, the leaders didn't understood it the way how trans people experience in the community. And therefore, policies has never been responsive in the last 5 years, 5 to 10 years, at least in HIV programming for trans people in the Philippines. So I think that's one. And then the second is, in terms of intentionality of decoloniality, I think that's also very crucial, because when we talk about decoloniality, we also talk about context, right? Because the context in Asia Pacific and even other parts of Asia is different in how we look at decoloniality. Part of the 2S LGBTQI focus group that we had when we were talking about bodily autonomy, a lot of very gender diverse, queer, feminist young people understands bodily autonomy very, very differently. So if you're coming also from other identities, like for example, you're an indigenous young person, part of the 2S LGBTQI community, one finding that we understood from the sharings was bodily autonomy also extends to your ancestral domain or ancestral land. So that's new, right? And that's different. So how do we incorporate that to our SRHR? So we see how cross-cutting our work is, right? And when we dismantle, when we talk about decoloniality, intersectionality, decision makers, leaders should have to bridge the gap between them and their community that they're trying to, represent or to decide on, or to amplify the voices of. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Now I want to call Kelvin to answer, please. Kelvin, are you here with us? Can you answer the question? Please.
Yes, I'm with you. One, I think the key stakeholders, policy making. The policymakers, you need the non-binaries to be the center stage in terms of making policies that are inclusive on their side. We need to be on the table when making various policies regarding gender identities. That is one. Two, creation of more spaces, and probably even a seat in various tables, particularly for gender and non-binary, in terms of whether it is in registration, whether it is in the policy-making process, as in all aspects, there must, we say probably and request, we have a seat specifically for a gender non-binary person. Us being at the center and the focal point on the conversation, a lot will be discussed. Policymakers need to involve us, Let the LGBTQ is quite a wide group, but the gender non-binaries need to be involved more, you know? Probably, for instance, whatever the various non-binaries are facing. So I think that is where we need to be in. We need to be on the table. We need to be among the policymakers. We need more spaces. And also as non-binaries, we need to be there when called upon to us, but we ourselves are not available. So as too, we need to be readily available when called upon to take certain measures and certain actions. That is it for me. Gabby?
Thank you so much, Kelvin. And I want to give the floor now to Flor to answer the question, please.
I was thinking, thank you. I was thinking now, like in my context, in my country, like with these policymakers, like how they can, or how we as like civil society can help them, like to understand, like to make the difference between the job that they have to do in the government than the one that they can do like on weekends, and to have like their own like religious beliefs and all that stuff. And I do believe that they have like the chance here in the Congress to present like different initiatives, like the ones they want, like they can prepare any document and they can present it there. They can present like any project, like to build laws and policies, because they are working for the government, but I don't know if they can like make like this difference in their head, like what it means like to work for a government, what it means to work for people in the country, like what it means to work for human rights. I don't know. I don't know if they even like recognize here in Guatemala what human rights stand for in the parliament. I don't know if, I mean, there are some things that we can do like from the civil society, but there are like some contexts that are like so difficult right now, that we have like to start thinking of other strategies where we can push like a little bit more, and with a little bit more of strength, to get like better results. Because right now here in Guatemala, what happened on the 8th of March is like very dangerous, meaning that our lives were like in danger. We were like this to be like illegal in our own country, and they were all approving that law. They had like they had like a lot of votes in the parliament, and they're allowed to do so in our societies. And that's, I'm really worried about that. I think we have to talk more about that and how we can work together.
Thank you so much. And to finish this part, Imara, can you answer this question as well, please?
Sure. I think I'll speak from the perspective of an international organization that works in these spaces like the UN. I think number one is that feminists that are in these spaces need to stand a very clear ground where we are when it comes to challenging the binaries, as you mentioned, and also being clear that these issues are not up for negotiation and they are actually the lived realities and lives of queer, trans people. And so I think that's one thing that needs to happen very clearly. And we also need to be the kind of do everything we can to amplify the voices of marginalized communities and on the ground, because I think that's really what our job is to do. And I think in showing up and practicing solidarity, I think that's the most important aspect, because I also feel like states, they some of them are in the middle, some of them don't understand, and some of them don't want to understand. And I think it's also within us to find a way to approach these different states together and find a way to make sure that those who understand can influence each other, but also understand that these states are, they can be our allies in some places, but they can also be not our allies in other places, right? So I think that's also a nuance that we have to figure out together and continue to do that as we work in these spaces. So that's just it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. With that answer, we finish our first segment. Before, I would just share with you some remarks. I think share is really important. And I think what you say now, Yumara, it's really interesting how some states are already changing this gender binary, decolonization, this gender binary that they have, and how they can be important for other states as well. And I think that's also where it comes the importance of the United Nations and those states that are already doing it, in keeping doing it and doing it more broadly. I think it is urgent that this to be an agenda and an important agenda of the United Nations and its member states. Because as you said, we are still LGBTQ people are not visible in the policy making. And as Kelvin said, we need to be doing those policies. We need to be on the table. And because if those leaders, as Vashti shared, don't understand the experience of a transgender people, of LGBTQ people, that's why we need even more to be doing the police, to be part of the construction of the police making in our countries, because actually we have contributions to very many different aspects of it, not only about LGBTQ plus issues, but about nature, biodiversity, about climate change, about education, so many different subjects that LGBTQ people are studying and doing it. And one other thing I want to highlight before we move on is the importance of the participation of LGBTQ people in those spaces, but also the importance of data to fight the gender binary. And I'm here today because of many transgender people that lost their lives. I'm here for Demetrius, for Paulo Vaz, for Leilani Assunção, Andrea Gonzalez, Rita Hester, and so many others, murder and suicide by the consequences of the violence of the gender binary. And what I want to say is that it is urgent that the United Nations and its member states to gather official data about violence, murder, and suicide of LGBTQI+ people, including non-binary people, because right now we have so many, we lack even data to be able to do more police making, to be able even to help with the police making we need to do it. I know there are like a lot of you here are doing it in your own locations, but now we need official data. We need to have the United Nations and those governments also having finances to this kind of research, this kind of police making, because the numbers are very, very frightful. I live in Brazil, and here the reality for transgender people, it's very, I get afraid. I don't know. I get afraid of me and of my friends, and also in other countries where still don't even have the information, the data to do more. Like the average person of a transgender person in Brazil is 35 years old, and I want to see more old transgender people. I want to get old, and I want more old transgender people. So that's why I want to just give this remark before we move on. And thank you again for all the speakers to share your knowledge. I'm learning a lot here today. And so let's go to the next segment. And now we will talk about the future beyond gender roles and how that is already impacting the work of activists for the gender equality and climate justice movement. And I just want to highlight that for this part of the segment, we will be keeping Yumaira and Vashti and Kelvin, and that Flor will join us in the closing remarks when we finish our conversation. So I will give a bit of an introduction to this first question that I'm going to make, because I think we're talking about data, and data is important for that one. So gender roles, those stereotypes of gender roles are created to determine what is expected of people, how people are expected to act, speak, dress, and this only based on their assigned gender at birth. And in a way, gender roles are created to control how people should act, how we should be. But this is changing. New research understood that the Generation Z, that are the people born between 1997 and 2012, they have grown up in a world of unprecedented gender fluidity, with more access to information on bodily autonomy, awareness on LGBTQI issues, and often surrounded by gender diverse role models in pop culture. With that, the research confirmed that the majority of young people nowadays are moving away from the colonial construction of the gender binary. And those young people agree that gender does not define a person as much as it used to in the past. Those gender roles don't determine how the person should act, should do, and all those other expectations. So additionally, around 52% of young people between 13 years old and 20 years old, they feel confident in their non-heterosexual identity. I think this data is so interesting. Yeah, so I want with that to ask the speakers finally, how is the fight for gender equality being impacted by the increased perception of young people that gender is no longer a defined characteristics about themselves? So how do you think all this context is changing this fight? And I want to start with Vashti, please.
I just felt, just an observation, Gabe, or how do I pronounce your name? Sorry, Gab. How do I pronounce your name?
Yeah, it can be Gabe, it can be Gabby. I go for all.
Just my observation, you picked me twice, like the first one to answer, to respond to you. So I'm your favorite for today. No, I'm just kidding. So to answer your question, I don't feel very strongly on that data. I feel like that hasn't captured what's happening, for example, in the Philippines. I feel like gender is very crucial. Maybe because it's so normalized, sometimes you don't see it as like a big thing. And also how, say for example, how we normalize sexual fluidity, for example, and therefore it was okay for our age to explore and these stuff, but eventually be straight at the end of the day. So something like that. Like that's also part of how the gender constructions of the gender binary and cis heterosexuality has been reinforced in some communities, right? But for me, I don't totally agree with that data. That might be reflective on some areas, but and so I think it seems like the question is a trap question for me, But also at the same time, when we talk about gender equality, gender equity, this is not, this is not just about genders and that's it. But because when we try to define gender, this is also multidimensional, right? Multisectoral. It cuts across. So it also talks about other identities that you have, like are you an indigenous person, your location, so on and so forth. And therefore, when we talk about gender equality and gender equity, we come from these contexts and how we push for that equality or equity that we wanted to pursue, right? And I think that's one way of looking at gender equality, gender equity in a more decolonial framings, and how some data need to be rethink as well, right? So yeah, because um, our ideas of cis-heteronormativity, for example, is also very context-based. So maybe how we understand cis-heteronormativity in other places is different in the Philippines or some parts of Asia, but this translates to fluidity in some areas. And so contextualizing these conversations are very important. Again, I think I have to go back to that. And in terms of moving forward, we go back to our lenses of, our work for gender equality and equity stands together with other multiple issues that marginalizes and exploits us altogether, but very different.
Thank you so much. And that's it. I think that's why we need the conversation about data, because data, it is a very tricky thing. It is, even though it is quantitative numbers, these numbers, they can be like changed in different ways. So it's very important to know, to have those remarks. And now I want to invite Kelvin to answer. I don't know if we'll be able to see Kelvin, but yeah, I think the audio will be working. Yes. Oh, now we are seeing you as well, Kelvin.
Oh, thank you. I would say I am 50-50 on the data, because I don't know whether it has brought about the African aspect of, or probably it has involved African and binaries, African queers. So I don't know whether we are in the survey or not. So I would be 50-50 on the same, particularly with the current state and the current governments we have, where approximately all homophobic, sorry to say. So, and they are in their traditional aspects where they only believe in either male or female. There is no gender inclusivity, particularly with what is happening in Ghana. So I'd be curious to know whether was Ghana included in the survey. So that is one. So that is, I would leave it at that. At the same time, I think I think the gender and binaries, we are at a position where we need more of sensitization, probably the community, they are in a point of, and I don't know, point of view, we are in the traditional where traditionally they have believed that there is either female or male. So we want them to understand that there is more of gender fluid in that category. There is more than two binaries. That is why the survey also said the youths are now more of non-heteronormative. So our main issue would be the aged, particularly the above 40. The above 40 in an African setting, they have grown to knowing either a man or a female, or either a man or a woman. They have grown to knowing women are supposed to be more of housewives, whereas men are the head. So I think also we need to sensitize, we need to create more awareness, we need more education, we need to have more talks, more spaces where everybody, whether you are the non-queer, the queer, the LGBTQ persons, they are involved in one conversation. In the aspect of them letting them understand what we are saying. That would be my pick. At the same time, I would also want we create more of the spaces, at local levels, at international levels, we need spaces which are all inclusive. Like I've previously said that in the UN, I don't think we have, in their sittings and in their delegates, I don't think there is a non-binary person in the delegation in the UN. I also don't think whether we have that category. I will be corrected by Gabi if we have one, but if we don't, I think we need to start from a point of view so that it trickles down to local governments, it trickles down to various UN institutions in the various countries, probably in the UNEP, in the UNESCO, in the UNICEF, where there are gender non-binaries, so that even when the organizations are sitting at the table with the African governments, with the Europe governments, there is also somebody sitting on the table who is a gender non-binary. They will not only be discussing of somebody, but the person will be there. They will be sitting next to the person. This is who we are talking about. These are their issues. These are what they are facing. I think that would create more awareness. It would also eradicate the aspect of you are either a male or female. So it will take time. That is something we have to agree, because for somebody who was probably at the age of 50, maybe they have heard about gender fluidity for the last 5 years. So they have lived for 45 years knowing we are either male or female. So it will take time. That is one. And we'll also have to be patient before, even it is the aspect of where you take a child to school. You don't expect the child will write his or her name or their name in the first day. They'll have to be trained the second day, the third day, the fourth day, until they graduate. I think also it is also the same with our capacity in terms of the various setup. It will have to take time, but the steps will have to be taken. So from step A to step B, something will be done, to step C to step D. So by the end, probably in 2 or 3 years to come, we will have some changes, not necessarily what we have now. For instance, in Kenya, there are some changes we have in the last 5 years. There have been the High Court allowed the registration of queer organizations. That is a change that wasn't there. So it took time, but we have it now. So queer organizations, the NGOs, they can be registered because they are also, in terms of the organizations, they can be registered now, but previously they were not. So also we are in court also on the repeal of section 162. It will take time, but at the end we'll see light at the end of the day. So we have to acknowledge that it is something that it is a process, and we will be involved in the process, and we will involve them in the process. That would be my take. Back to you, Gabi.
Thank you so much for all your answers. And one thing that's so sorry I forgot to share with you, this data was from North America, and I think it is very important because I don't think it includes the diversity of the gender diversity we have in the world. And that's something like I see that there will be a lot of importance to also listen a lot more what we have to say about gender in the corners of the South, into different places that we are from, because actually if you think about this ancestry, how were things before the colonization, many different cultures, many different societies most of them actually didn't have this binary thought that was brought. So I think there's a lot to learn with it. And also I think a lot about language and how we have to start also creating new language and even allowing ourselves to bring back what we had in our in other languages. I say, at least from talking from Brazil, where our language now is Portuguese, but how can we bring back the indigenous language that already have different ways of thinking gender identity? And I think this is very important. One thing that I think I just want to highlight before we move on is what Kelvin was saying about the United Nations spaces, how we need an all inclusivity in all different spaces. And at least for me, I see there is a necessity and an urgency to have a United Nations organ, a United Nations segment, a group, or even like a conference that is talking about LGBTQ plus and transgender issues, because I think there are very specificities that are not being right now addressed. And so it is all this group of people that is not included, and how we should be in every conference. Where are the non-binary people in all the conference? I was at COP26 last year at Glasgow, and I met some non-binary people, and I was so happy to be with non-binary and transgender people. But we need more, and we need more ways of having those people in different conferences, in different places, because we have a lot to bring to the table about very different issues. And yeah, and that's what you said. We need education, and also awareness around anti-transgender violence. And okay, so moving on, the next question is regarding the messages. So what type of changes in messages and advocacy have come from this non-binary perspective, this perspective that is moving beyond these gender roles? And to start answering it, I will call Vashti.
I think in terms of changes in the language, I think prioritizing how local and native and indigenous language has been used. Because, for example, the terms that we use on transness, on non-binary, and queer, there's an issue of acceptability to these terms, because historically, this went into a certain specific process where our communities in the different part of the world were not much involved, and now we're just accepting it as if that's it, right? As if that captures our lived experiences as non-binaries, right? And that's a lot of struggle when we work here in the communities in the Philippines, grassroots work, because they don't identify with the terms, they don't feel the terms resonate with them, but the terms that are culturally appropriate, the terms that they actually use, may be words that have been stigmatized, may be words that has been used to harass them, and also has been, but these words are also been they've used it for themselves as part of how they liberate themselves from the stigmatizing terms that we use, so, or stigmatizing ways of communication. So yeah, I think one is to prioritize that, how to ensure that native language, indigenous language, local language are maximized, and how our terms now should acknowledge that, should bridge that, should weave the importance of our languages to ensure that there's acceptability amongst us, right? So yeah, maybe I can add later on, but let me think about it.
Thank you so much, Vashti. And I'll give floor now to Kelvin.
I will agree with Vashti, the aspect of our languages being used. We've read, historically, queerness has been here in Africa. Historically, previously, it is not that we are bringing it now. So it has been there. There were terms and terminologies that were used then. Why can't we now embrace them now? Because previously they were acceptable. They would interact with the words as commonly as we are talking now, previously, historically, but in the current state, the communication and the languages and the words and the terms are seen as they are now obsolete. They are non-African. So why not now embrace what was previously used in our ancestral lands, by our ancestors, by our forefathers, whom they actually acknowledged them. I think that is now, we bringing those traditional words now, then we now start using them in the aspect of, we eliminate the aspect of queerness is a Western culture. We have seen it is a culture that has been there before. It has been there before historically. So only probably I would say previously they weren't as vocal as we are now. As vocal as we are now. I don't know whether they were vocal then. But historically probably they weren't as vocal as we are now. So the only difference is we are vocal now about it. So I think the messaging now, we should embrace what was being used back then. We introduce the terms, the sentencing of words, the various namings, the various cultures, because in most African cultures, even in history, even in books, we read that there were marriages, there were same-sex marriages, there were various issues. So I think it is now us adopting what was previously there. Not now the Western, as they said, but what was traditionally there. The African now that was lived in the 60s, in the 1930s, in the 1800s. Now we bring it back. That aspect, I think, to create a more cohesive and a more general understanding in terms of messaging. Since if we introduce something new, they will say it is Western. So now, I think it is now we use what was used before in terms of communication. Yes.
That's it. So on point. That's it. And I want us to bring those to English. If we're going to continue to use English, I want us to bring this gender diverse language to it. I want to hear more about hijras, travestis, all the gender identity diversity we have in all this world, and have more people talking about these, like how it is in different places of the world. And this excites me a lot to hear from you. And now to finish our segment of today, this last segment, we will be answering, sorry, I will be asking you that we think now how we can reimagine what we are talking about here. So with all that was shared today, how do you reimagine feminist leadership and activism in different areas in this progressively non-binary and intersectional world? And to start now, I want to give floor to Kelvin.
Gabby, I thought you'd give some, okay, I'll take it. I was actually taking my breath. So I think we are, I will speak in the African aspects. There is a lot to be done in terms of feminist organization, in terms of feminism. There is a lot to be done. One particular organization that I would actually ask, or probably people to learn from, is the Nigerian FEMCO, the feminist organization in Nigeria. During the SARS, was it? And SARS, I think the feminist organization was quite involved, to a point where some even had to run away from their mother country because of the government injustices. So I think that organization broadened and opened our eyes during that End SARS. I hope most of you heard of it during the End SARS campaigns. So and it was at the focal point. So with that, we understand that now we acknowledge this, so things can be done. You know, that aspect of, yes, things can be done, where their bank accounts were closed. Once your bank account are closed, they move to crypto, you know, the tech. We also embrace technology there, and also the social medias. I think it is, we also embrace social media, we also embrace tech, so that we can have a more diversified conversation probably in the next 5 or 4 years to come. Since currently everybody's on TikTok, everybody's on Instagram, everybody's on Facebook, everybody's on Twitter. I think now we need to take the conversation there, you know, those videos, those talks, we need now to create that space and take that space and use what is available. Also, I see in the next 5 years, we will be somewhere. I feel that we are being felt, particularly the African governments are feeling us, because a lot is changing. You wouldn't compare what we are experiencing now with what we were experiencing before. There is, even if it is a 1% change, but the change is observable. You know, that kind of we shaking the governments and everything. I think it will bring us to a point where we are all now included in the various aspects. I will take it as that for me.
Thank you, Kelvin. Now moving to the next person. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to the end of the session, so I will please ask you to be brief in your answer, but I'll call you, Myra, to answer now.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to thank Kelvin and also Vashti and for the interventions. And I think what's really important to the question that you just asked, sorry, my screen is, I think if we really want to reimagine a meaningful and actually intersectional feminist leadership, we really need to, one thing that I was thinking as everybody was talking was rethinking the hierarchy of knowledge and abilities, and recognizing that us as feminists, as gender, like we can also reproduce systems of oppression. And when I speak particularly to the hierarchy of knowledge, we have to recognize the plurality of knowledge, and especially like in the UN spaces, unless you use this term, unless you use this kind of language, then it's not recognized, you know. And so we have to be able to not just bridge that gap, but also challenge that, because we have within feminisms, within LGBTQ organizations, knowledge is diverse, and it's also being filtered through the oppressive systems that we know of, heteronormativity, and colonization. And so decentralizing and decolonizing knowledge, I think, is a very important step within the NGO circle and within international organizations, and how, like I said, we relate to each other. And this also means that we have to build respectful relationships between different forms of lived experience and knowledge, and make activism and the terms that we use more accessible for those that are not necessarily in our circle. And I think another thing I think that's really important, or how I see transformative feminist leadership, is also we have to build cross-movement agendas that centers the multiplicity and cohesion between our intersectional struggles. So we have to move away from individual approaches and structured collective organizing. And I think we have to think of ways to really foster better connections and dialogues through spaces that we've also never really thought of before, because like I said, the spaces that we're in can be really exclusionary in and on itself. So this is my last words.
Thank you so much. I think that's a good way to finish our segment. Let's think more collective, how we can do this together, supporting ourselves. And Vashti already see the question on the chat, so you can see it. And I will now move in the last 10 minutes that we have to our closing remarks. And first I want to invite Flor back to our conversation. So, sorry, Flor had a tech problem and is not here anymore. So we are just going to move forward to the closing remarks. And I want you to share now your final thoughts by answering this question. As non-binary activists continue to fight for inclusion at the table, what do you think our allies need to do to create a more intersectional future? And I want to invite Vashti first to answer this question.
I think for me, I think allies should be our accomplices. So allies, allyship, I think is not enough. I think allies should be accomplices, should be very intentional in being with us. When Omaira mentioned that, gender diversity is non-negotiable, it's really non-negotiable. And when we talk about feminist leadership, queer leadership, young leadership, this is also accessible, like Omaira's mentioned, and it's also disruptive. So I think as young people and as activists, we understand that disrupting these spaces is crucial, especially when there's corporate capture, right? Retrogression, anti-rights, and also just to frame this, that when we talk about anti-rights narratives and anti-trans, anti-non-binary, anti-queer narratives, these are sometimes subscribing to the gender binary, and therefore that's why we're talking about dismantling it together with our allies, our accomplices. And it's important that, when we demand this, they share their power with us and they amplify us better. And they do not take up our space and ensure that any, for example, other institutions who tries to take away our power, to take away our voice, and to take away our narrative, they're there to support us and to back us up, because we back up each other, right? Yeah, and that's how we build collective power altogether.
Thank you so much. And I want to invite now Kevin for the closing remarks. Kelvin, can you please share your closing remarks? Are you able to listen to us right now? Oh, yes.
Yes, can you hear? I hope you can hear me. So allies should include us in their spaces, probably in their job markets, in their leadership hierarchies. They should include us in their social streams. They should embrace us, in all aspects, not necessarily only being there as allies. They should include us in all aspects, in all social life aspects. They should also be in the forefront of policy making. During the policy making processes, they should include us in their messaging, probably when they are creating policies, they should include non-binaries in their messaging. And something else, they should also be our comfort, at times where government is so hard on us, our allies become our protector. They should be open and embrace us when we need them most. And one more thing is that they should also assist when we need them, during when we are in courts, when we are in the various legal, when we are facing some other various legal issues. they should assist us in their knowledge, probably lawyers coming in, advocates coming in during these legal issues and handling, and probably even being more accommodating during the processes. They should be allies in words and in actions, not only allies only. They should be allies in words and also in action. So let them include us in their spaces. Let them include us in their workspaces. Let them include us in their leadership hierarchy in their workplaces. Let them include us in their messaging. Let them include us in their various social lives. Let them include us in their knowledge and engagement capacity. Let them be there for us as we are there for them. Back to you, Gabby.
Thank you so much, Kelvin, for your message. And to the final closing remarks, I'll pass it on to you, Myra.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree, and I'm going to say much of what she said. We have to be accomplices together, and it's going beyond inclusion of the table, bringing someone to the table. We have to recreate the whole table together. And I think that's the most important thing of dismantling and recreating and co-creating. So I'll just end with that. Thank you so much.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing all your knowledge here today. I learned a lot, and I hope everybody that is here with us also learned a lot. Yeah, that's it. Let's recreate the table, and we have to continue to ask for more and more of people, because it's not only about allyship. We have to be on the places, be part of every part of the decision-making process of every part of different organizations that talk about different topics. And because that's it, allyship is not enough. I want us to be able to hear each other's struggles, to hear each other's pain, to hear each other's issues, and be able to take it and build things differently from now, because the violence and pain is systemically, is working as a system. So we need to change everything how it is now. And now I want to thank you all for joining us in this session of the Queer Youth Dialogues. Remember, this is a year-long campaign, so we hope you continue to join us in the next sessions. And that together we can continue to build a stronger global youth movement for LGBTIQ human rights with more resources, data, support, and power. Don't forget to follow our social media channels for more information. If you are a young person, also sign up to the Queer Youth Network's mailing list via the website, of which we are now sharing the link for it in the chat box. Also, keep an eye out in the coming weeks, as you will see our final report for the Queer Youth Dialogues. So all your remarks are really important to gather information for this report. And in summary, what we want to say is to stay engaged with us in this work and with our community as we move forward stronger together. And thank you so much for your participation, for your knowledge. And it was a big pleasure to be here with you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.